Welcome everybody to the September 2022 Global Power Platform Admins user group. We're really excited about today. We're going to be talking about ALM and the admin experience and kind of what that means for us. So again, we're a community dedicated to furthering the knowledge and maintaining and supporting the Power Platform. So we're really trying to create this community and this discussion with each other and supporting each other. So this month, I kind of just highlighted a few things that are in the COE starter kit. There's this new piece, which is the Power Platform Administration Planning component. So if you haven't seen that yet, check that out. It is it's really, really cool, and I think it's going to help a lot of us, especially in understanding our teams and what we need to do. And then obviously, in honor of today, we wanted to talk about the ALM accelerator updates that have happened. So there's a lot going there. If you look at the, especially the bug list and even the new features this month, it's significant. It really is. So then moving on to our upcoming events, there's a lot going on in the next 30 days, literally. Mike and Jens will talk about this more about their ALM office hours, which are coming up. We also have the Power Platform Conference next week in Orlando, Florida. So if any of you are going to be there, let me know. We can find a way to meet up at some point in person, actually see each other, which would be just crazy. And then just recently announced is Microsoft Ignite, and that's the October 12th through 14th. And registration is going on now. And I know that there was registration for like the in-person component, but I think I saw that was gone like in, I think in minutes. So, but do check that out. I think we're going to see a lot of stuff here coming up in the next 30 days, which is going to be really cool. I noticed this too, and I wanted to cover this. So it's at effective October 2022. The COE Starter Kit version Dataverse for Teams looks like it's no longer going to have any investment into it moving forward. So it looks like it's going to kind of stay where it's at. And one thing that they talked about is installing the COE starter kit in a production environment and then looking at doing the pay-as-you-go plans if you don't have that proper licensing. So I just thought that was something interesting to bring up if you are using that and kind of be aware of. So today I'm really excited. So we're going to talk about ALM and the Power Platform Admin. There are a lot of really great ALM sessions out there, and they're kind of talking more about from the end user experience and kind of the maker and citizen dev. But what I hoped we could engage this conversation today is really around what does it mean for those of us who are admins for the Power Platform. What are the kind of some of the concepts, constructs around that? Jens and I talked for a little bit yesterday, and there were some really cool things that were brought up there. They even got me thinking. So hopefully this will kind of get the juices flowing, and again, make it as dynamic as possible. Ask questions. Let's keep the conversation going. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Mike Ochs is Executive Vice President and MVP at Excellence. Did I say that right, Mike? Is it Excellence?
It is. That was
yeah. Okay.
You said my last name right too, which is even more impressive.
You know what? And I really appreciate it because I wanted to make sure I was trying not to destroy last names, and your little pronunciation thing was really, really cool. So thanks for doing that.
No problem.
So yeah, and Power Platform and ALM expert by practice, and I would absolutely agree with you. If any of you have been on the GitHub issues list and you've seen the engagement, you will know that the level of expertise is extreme. And then Jens, and I'm going to try, I'm not even going to try. So I'm going to say Schroder, but I'm actually going to let Jens say how to properly say his last name.
Yeah, so it's Jens Schroder.
Schroder.
Good luck with that.
I can't do it. I absolutely.
I know it's fine. I go by Schroder most of the time anyway, so that's fine. That's okay.
All right. So senior program manager for the PowerCAT team, and we had some cool brief discussions yesterday about this. So with that, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Andrew. Let me share my screen. We'll start as we do in Microsoft with slides before getting into the exciting bits. And I'd like to just keep the teams up here. So not too many slides and hopefully not boring at least. But just try to set the stage for not just ALM Accelerator, but also in general, what is ALM for Power Platform. We will be having hopefully some time for questions after presentation and demo. So you're welcome to ask your questions, but the answers will be brief to try and get through this so we can see the demo and then have a conversation about the ALM. So,
and really quickly, Jens, and feel free to put them in the chat, and I can monitor as well. So we keep them going.
Because I am not good at monitoring the chat while presenting.
No problem.
Thank you for that. So how do we think about ALM? And this, when we, that means Mike, me, the rest of the ALM team in PowerCAT and Power Platform in general from Microsoft side. So really it evolves around build, test, and deploy in this iterative process that most of you probably are very familiar with. So around that, we need some way or form to manage that process, have documented processes maybe on how we do these things, but preferably we want to automate the processes that are in the management layer, so the iteration through these phases will be more or less fully automated, meaning also repeatable with the expectations of the same result every time you run through this stage. So that's sort of what when we think about ALM, at least that's what we think about it, right? And why would we then even want to have this ALM for low code? Some customers would say, well, but it's like Excel. We don't have any sort of ALM for Excel, or we have, it's just citizen developers making applications in default environment. True, if that's the case, then maybe the ALM requirements are not particularly high, but with the sort of growth in complexity and criticality, business continuity can be a very important factor. You want to ensure that you have proper support for successful deployments to deliver the business value that you have promised your users, right? So obviously in between we can have different sizes or complexity or other, and I think just our point is that as the type of apps that you are considering grow in terms of complexity and criticality, then ALM requirements become more and more important to think about and try to implement. And also just very fundamental, those, I know at least one here who has been around for long enough to know this for sure, the fundamentals of ALM is that we use solutions in Dataverse. So when we also speak ALM, it's specific to Dataverse environments, and also meaning we must have our apps, flows, everything else we build inside of solutions. Those are the containers that we deploy to our what we call downstream environment, so end up in production. And for those not super familiar with solution, then a solution really can contain any component more or less that you can build in Power Platform. So everything from your Dataverse data model to the different types of apps, to code first components like plugins and PCF controls, and also security roles and virtual entity configuration and many other components. So they all fit into a solution, and that is what we then deploy. Also, there's actually quite good documentation on docs on application lifecycle management, or ALM, for Power Platform, right? That's a lot of content there, but it is mostly theoretical in the sense that it explains concepts and gives you ideas for what to consider when implementing. And some of the things, as mentioned, we want solutions. Ideally, we want source control, which is, for those familiar with this concept from SharePoint, maybe, SharePoint document libraries host versions of the same document. Source control does the same for code and Power Platform solutions also, meaning we can have n number of versions of the same solution, and we can track differences and changes between them. We would also like to have what we call developer isolation, which is that, and that's something we are striving to achieve. We're not there yet, but developer isolation basically means that developers should be able to work without stepping on each other's feet. And you also would know that, if multiple developers are working on the same solution in the same environment, they're for sure not isolated, and they can easily break each other's work. But that's something to consider. How can we achieve that? And we do have some tooling and automation in our ALM accelerator to assist with that. We also talk about commit small units of work and do it often. That's from the sort of traditional coding and source code principles. Don't do commits every 2 weeks before the sprint ends. Rather do maybe even several commits a day. So implement that little feature, commit that. Implement that other feature or fix that other bug and commit that. That will help you in the longer run to sort of manage both. It will help you with the automation, it will help you to ensure the quality, and it will help the developer make sure that what they deliver works as expected. Also from traditional coding, submit for review through pull request. A pull request is a mechanism where you get the opportunity to review the changes before they are actually saved to the version control. And normally that would be something we would say a peer review, so another developer familiar with the feature being implemented but not necessarily deep into how it's done will review and check that it looks correct. And also things like naming conventions are followed and other things. So 4 and 5 go together. If you do it every 2 weeks, the commits, then it's a lot of code to changes to review. If you do small, it's much simpler. And then merge into main. That's a fairly also technical concept. What is important, I think, is the 100% automation. Everything we do should be automated. There should not be a requirement, everything that can be automated. There should not be a requirement for someone to go into the production environment after deployment and configure anything in the solution. That should be done in advance of the deployment. And preferably, that configuration should be saved into source control. So that is also documented and version controlled, and you can track changes to that. And this is sort of maybe even can become somewhat of a religious conversation, but you should ship as managed, meaning you should deploy managed solutions to anything but your developer environment. In your dev, you are welcome to have unmanaged. Actually, you should have, otherwise it's difficult to develop, but really should look to deploy managed solutions. And Thomas came on screen, and we probably even had this conversation in our past when we were colleagues, but Solution Checker, it's a pretty good tool. Actually, if you're not familiar, you can run it from the solution page on the solution, but it can also be run in an automated way, and it will return results to tell you how the solution follows the best practices. And you can even set different levels of sort of how strongly should it enforce these rules. So you can tell it to break a deployment or prevent a deployment if rules are not followed, and that could go down even to things like accessibility rules on have you put in the sensible label names or screen names or other things. So for instance, a screen reader can understand and read what the app does. I'm maybe taking too long to go through these slides, to be honest. In terms of ALM for Power Platform, we have from Microsoft the Power Platform build tools for Azure DevOps. Those are a set of what we call tasks that can be used in Azure DevOps to build automation for deploying solutions and do many other things. So you can see on the right side here, there's a task to apply a solution upgrade. There's a task to back up an environment. You you can run the checker, you can copy an environment, and there are many others, other tasks in there. We also have the same tasks, more or less at least same functionality, in what is called GitHub Actions. So that means we can do ALM for Power Platform on both Azure DevOps and GitHub, right? And we also have what is called the Power Apps command line interface, which actually is the mechanism, sort of, that is the code that are in both the DevOps tasks and in the GitHub Actions. And by itself, as a Power Apps, as the command line interface, it can be run in a command prompt, and you can do, pretty much a lot of the things you would want to do in regards to automation of deployments. And that is also a way that you can then, by scripting that, you would be able to automate a deployment from, pretty much a PowerShell file or anything else that can be scripted. So before I just go to the next slide, so those three options there, really, like the Azure DevOps tasks, the GitHub Actions, and the CLI in itself, enables anybody to build automation for ALM automation for delivering Power Platform solutions to the end users. But it also leaves everybody who goes on that journey with a lot of work. There are also, by the way, other tools out there that can assist. Those that have been in Dynamics CE before would maybe know, while Hamsi, who has, I think they're called D365 CE ALM tools or something like that, but also a set of tasks, at least for Azure DevOps. So there are plenty of opportunities to build automation yourself, but that also means manage and maintain, and it is a lot of work. We know because we spent the time doing this, and that's where the ALM accelerator for Power Platform comes in. And I'll go brief now because we want to see the demo. It really is the idea is have developers who via a Canvas app we deliver can leverage the power of Azure DevOps to deploy to downstream environments, as we call them. And I think, we briefly look at this process. So the maker will, and the purple here are manual tasks, and the green are automated tasks. So the maker will do development, use the Canvas app to commit or save that those changes into Azure DevOps. That will automatically export the solution and put it in source control. Then the maker will say, okay, I'm ready to deploy to the test. That by default in our configuration will automatically do a validation of the solution, Power Platform solution checker. Can it be built into a solution? Can it be imported to make sure that whatever we try to deploy to test will successfully be deployed? And then 6 here, and actually also 8, with the latest release actually are green. So those can be automated completely as well. So taking away 2 more manual steps, but those previous to September release was manual steps to complete what is called a pull request, which is what triggers the deployment to the downstream, to test and production, right? So there used to be a manual step there. It can still be used to do like actual approval or quality gate, or make sure we only deploy to production at a specific window of time or other things, but it can also be automated. So I think with that, Mike, if you would share a demo of some of these things. And I think actually we did agree before that you should do the 2 last slides there, but now I did it.
No, I appreciate it. And you did a fantastic job. So thanks. All right. So if you can see my screen, what you're looking at is the ALM accelerator for Power Platform. It's a easy button sort of Canvas app that you could honestly build yourself. I wouldn't advise it. We've spent a lot of time building it. However, it's an app that sits over top of Azure DevOps pipelines. And those Azure DevOps pipelines sit over Azure DevOps tasks, as well as some PowerShell. But ultimately, we've got an entire YAML library of pipelines out there that this app interacts with. And those pipelines aren't required those pipelines don't require this app to be usable. So if you want to take inspiration from those pipelines, you absolutely can. If you want to take those pipelines as they are and build your own interface over top of them, you absolutely can. But ultimately, this is sort of the easy button layer over top of those pipelines. And the pipelines are what drives the whole ALM process. We currently only support Azure DevOps. So just a heads up there, if you're a GitHub organization, the ALM Accelerator does not support GitHub today. We have plans to port a lot of what we built over to GitHub as well. But like Jens had mentioned, obviously ultimately what's at the bottom of this whole stack is the PAC CLI. So the GitHub and Azure DevOps tasks that Microsoft distributes both sit on top of PAC CLI. PAC CLI, as of just recently, back in August, is now fully platform independent. So it can run on Linux, it can run on Windows. And now that they've kind of consolidated what was the Azure DevOps task previously, were just a library of PowerShell, a PowerShell library that they would download and they'd run PowerShell scripts. And now everything is PAC based so that they can support both GitHub and Azure DevOps going forward, and have the same code base for both. So that's just a little bit about the architecture. And we, as of this September release, ported, or didn't port over, but moved over to the version 2 of the Azure DevOps tasks, which are all PAC CLI based. And there's some performance gains there. There's also there's active development there. The 1.0 version of the tasks is kind of deprecated at this point. It's still there, but there's not active development going on there. So just a heads up, if you have your own pipelines, if you rolled your own pipelines previously, you'll want to get on the .2 version, or the 2.0 version. Anyway, so what we're looking at here is the ALM Accelerator for Power Platform. When you first come into this experience, you'll be presented with this screen here, and I'll move this over. And what it's asking you for is your maker environment. For those of you who are devs, that's your dev environment, right? That's where you have all your unmanaged solutions that you're working on, or maybe you have a couple of unmanaged solutions that you're working on there, but you can switch between environments and display in this list all of your unmanaged solutions in that environment. And this is, where you're doing your work. This is where you're making updates, and this is where you're committing from to source control. And then ultimately, you're going to say, this looks good. You're doing your inner loop of testing and updating and et cetera. And then ultimately, you're going to say, okay, I want to commit this to source control, and then I want to deploy it out to a downstream environment. And those downstream environments are configured in what we call deployment profiles. So if we look at this solution, for instance, we've got some information in here about what the DevOps organization is. So in our case, it's this P platform. We've got a solution project. That's where we're going to source control all of our unpacked solution source code. We've got a pipeline project. So that's where our pipelines are hosted. Our Azure DevOps pipelines are hosted. And then a solution repository, which is the repo underneath this project where we're actually going to store the unpacked solutions. I'll gloss over this for now. You do have an option. There are options here. If you know what you're doing, you can go into the admin app. There's a model-driven admin app that will allow you to configure this. But by default, the solution branching strategy that we're using is maybe a little bit too deep to get into, but it's rather than branching off of main to a feature branch, we have the concept out of the box that you have a sort of holding area for your solution, for your ongoing solution development, so that Main always represents what's been released. Your solution branch represents what's upcoming. And then your feature branches branch off of that solution branch, which is your personal workspace for development. So this use solution branches is the default. You can configure this to be different if your branching strategy is different. But by default, this is kind of what we go with. There's our deployment environments. So right now we have 3 in the September release. We've added the ability to make this 4 or 5 or 1 or whatever you choose, kind of choose your own adventure there. But out of the box, we do these 3 environments, and the validation environment is that first environment that says, can this thing be deployed? Can it be built? Can it be deployed? And is it copacetic before I push it to test, so that you don't mess up your test environment, your UAT environment ahead of actually wanting to release the test. And then we have test and we have production. Right. So I'll leave that as is. So from here, from this dashboard, I can open up a solution. I can dive right into the solution experience. So again, solutions. The idea behind this is that, even for those makers who aren't familiar with what a solution is, that it kind of puts them into the pit of success, and that they're always kind of working in a solution as opposed to creating Canvas apps, ad hoc outside of solutions. So this is our sample solution. It's got, and being that this is developed by the PowerCAT team, it's got a Canvas app, it's got an admin app in here, and if we want to look at what that Canvas app looks like, this is the PowerCAT daily task, daily work app, I guess. It's pretty contrived, but it's also kind of fun. So this is our app, and I launched it in edit mode, but you can see that it has some daily cat facts, and this is utilizing a custom connector that goes out to a public API and pulls in some cat facts. I can get new daily cat facts. Their eyesight, I've seen that one before. Usually it's pretty new ones. But anyway, this is a custom connector. This is a gallery that's showing a SharePoint list. Some of these values are sourced from flows and environment variables. So this is sort of the canonical, and we keep adding to this as we go to ensure that all of those sort of low code scenarios are met, as well as the code first scenarios that will be lighting up here soon. So we keep adding to this app to sort of exercise all of those, things that people are doing in the Power Platform. So one thing I can do here, I can say I like this, right? And that's going to kick off a flow. That's going to actually send me an email through a flow. It's going to write a record into Dataverse. So again, kind of exercising all of those different things you would want to do. But if I decide that daily cat tasks isn't what I want, or here, I'll say my tasks. I'll say these are, I'm just going to make a update. I'll say these are cat tasks and save this and publish it. We'll get to see how this kind of goes downstream into the, the target environments, how it shows up in a pull request in Azure DevOps, how it shows up in the source repo, etc. This minor change that I made. So I'll close out of here. I'm done with that. I like it, and I'm going to go ahead and commit it. So updated tasks label, and I've got a branch out here. So we've got 2 kind of experiences, right? So this is the advanced maker experience, and actually these are, you can have more than 2 experiences, and these can be shared with individuals. at your organization. And in my case, I have access to 2. I have a maker experience, which looks a little different. Some of the functionality went away based on my experience there. You can see delete solution goes away, import has a different name, and so do these buttons. So the idea behind this is you can have sort of personas, right, that interact with ALM. And those personas may not be familiar or may not be comfortable with Git concepts like commit, like branch, etc. And their experience is going to light up a little bit different. So if I hit save solution, you'll see I don't have any branches here. I just have some notes and an option to include Power Apps and Portals or Power Pages. Once, the whatever you like to call it. But you can configure this as well. You can turn this off. You can set this to be on as default, etc. But if I go back to my advanced maker experience, you'll see I've got ALM Accelerator sample solution, and now I've got branches lit up. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to include my Power Pages. That'll show me a drop down of all of the websites that are in, and this is something that we just released in September, in the September release. I've got a list of all the websites in my my development environment, and you can select a website to go along with your solution. Now, ultimately, portals or Power Pages will be solution aware, and this sort of mapping between solution and a website will go away in the ALM Accelerator. But for the time being, we've lit this up as a capability to say, I kind of want to export. I want to export this Power Pages project or this portal along with my solution. I can create a new branch here. I'm not going to. I could base it off of, for example, main, or I could base it off of the existing solution branch, right? So this is my solution branch. I could say this is Mox or my initials, and this is sample solution dash some number, right? Like some GitHub issue or some Azure DevOps task that I'm associating with this. I can enter, I can hashtag this and say 1, 2, 3, 4, and associate that with the actual issue in Azure DevOps. But I'm going to go back and not create a new branch. I'm just going to commit it directly to my Johanna branch because I already have one out there. I'm going to include that, and that looks good. I'll go ahead and commit. All right, so at this point, I haven't shown you anything about sort of the things that Jens touched on, and that's the ability to push something into a downstream environment without having to touch anything in that downstream environment after deployment. There are a lot of gotchas in Power Platform ALM, specifically around things like connection references, which are, connections in a downstream environment that need to be wired up when you deploy a solution. Environment variables, like what are those specific environment variables in that downstream environment, right? We're talking about 3 environments that we're deploying to. We want to set environment variables. We want to share Canvas apps with people. We want to share other assets with people. We want to set ownership on things. So all of those things contribute to getting a solution in a working state in a downstream environment. And if you don't do that, do those things, you'll have to go in and you'll have to manually do them after deployment. So we have the concept of deployment settings, and the deployment settings are all of those things, right? So at this point, we're going out, we're looking what connection references are in this solution, what environment variables are in the solution, what apps are in the solution, what group teams, connectors, custom connectors, flows, etc. So this has, we've got 2 connection references here, and you can see we've got our environment drop down up here. And I happen to have 2 connections. I have these 2 connections already in that environment. But if I wanted to, for example, if there wasn't one here, I can click the plus button, click create, go ahead and log in. And then when I come back here, I'll hit refresh. This is very similar to how you import solutions manually, right? Like when you import a solution manually, it's going to prompt you for the connection references. It's going to prompt you to create those connections in order to wire up the flows and the flows in the downstream environment. So now I've got two. They're both named the same. Unfortunately, this is a limitation in the platform, but I've got two connections instead of one. I can pick one of those. In addition to that, we've got environment variables. So here's our environment variable that drives our custom connector in the solution. So catfact.ninja, if you guys want to get your own cat facts, you can get it from this website. We've got a sort of text variable, we've got a decimal variable, we've got a JSON environment variable. We've also got a data source environment variable for SharePoint here. So that SharePoint list that we saw in the app is driven by what we're pointing to here. And let's just say, I think we have this one. Let's do this one. So this is the site. This is the data source, which is a list inside of SharePoint. We can set that. We've got secret environment variables. This is a little bit, you need to put the URL into this field. And that's sort of the guidance that the Power Platform Build Tools team suggests at this point. We don't have a better interface for that, unfortunately, but you can provide a URL here for a secret environment variable as well. In addition to that, we've got Canvas apps. So here is our Cat Planner sample app. We can share that with an AAD group. We can set the permissions there. We can actually see who's in that group by drilling down into it. And for example, we've got all these people in that group. That's who's going to get shared with. And then if we jump over to group teams, so the idea behind the group teams is that in that downstream environment, you're going to want to provide access to certain things, including your solution tables and things like that. So if you got a table in your solution that it doesn't exist in the downstream environment, and you want to provide access to a group of users to that table, then you have to provide a group team, which is mapped to an AAD group, and then assign roles to it. And similar to that, you have to provide things like sharing flows, sharing of custom connectors, etc. So you can actually create group teams, AAD group teams in a downstream environment using this functionality, and then you can assign specific roles. So you can see we've got ALM specific roles here that we're going to assign to that group team, and then everything is managed. All of the permissions are managed in AAD as opposed to being managed at a user by user level. So that's the idea behind this. Under flows, there's flow ownership, which is who in that downstream environment is going to own this flow, because all of our pipelines run as a service principal. And when a service principal imports the solution, the flow will be owned by that service principal and not by particular user in that downstream environment. So you can set ownership, and the sort of canonical scenario there is you've got a scheduled flow that hits a API endpoint like Dataverse, and you want that flow's requests to Dataverse to come from a specific user, meaning it pulls down from their from the calls from their pool, as opposed to a service principal has a certain number of calls that are available to it in a 24-hour period, and if you exceed that, then they're going to start to throttle you. So you can assign ownership in a downstream environment to say, no, this is Johanna's flow, and I want Johanna's user to pull down from that the number of calls and things like that. Team sharing, again, this is sharing the Dataverse record associated with this flow. in the downstream environment. This is unfortunately sort of a limitation in the platform right now, whereby if you have a Canvas app that calls a flow, the Dataverse record for that flow, it needs to be shared with the user who is running the app. Hopefully this will go away at some point. This is kind of a workaround to that product limitation, but that's why it's there. And then we have activation. So who's going to activate this? And our pipelines are smart enough to activate based on a couple of different conditions. They will activate based on who created a connection for a connection reference. If you have no connection references, it will look for an owner that's been assigned. If there's no owner assigned, it will look for this value, this activation user. Who do you want to activate this as? Because a service principal as of today cannot activate directly a flow, especially if there's a connection reference involved, because the owner of that connection has to be the one that activates that flow. So what we do in our pipelines is we use impersonation of the service principal based on one of these users that we've discovered has a role in this flow, and we will activate based on that configuration. That's a little bit convoluted. Again, it's sort of an unfortunate side effect of how the Power Platform handles ownership and things like that and permissions, but that's why we have this functionality in place. And then you can specify the activation order. This is here primarily because you can't activate a parent flow before you've activated its child flow. We have a workaround in the pipeline where you don't necessarily need to set this. It will just it will handle it automatically, but it will handle it with warnings, and it'll let you know that something's not right, but it'll continue on and it'll actually activate it automatically. So this isn't as important anymore, and we could probably get rid of this, but it's still there for that scenario. Whether or not to activate a flow is here as well. So if you don't want to activate a flow in a downstream environment, you've got a scheduled flow that does a lot of work, and you want to provide somebody with the ability to say, you know what, you can activate this if you want to, but we're not going to activate it by default. So that's why that's there. And that was a requirement. A lot of these requirements come out of the fact that we use the ALM accelerator internally on the PowerCAT team to do all of our ALM around the COE starter kit. And just a little bit of history, this was built specifically for the COE starter kit to do ALM. And we decided that it was useful enough to us to actually distribute it out to everybody else. And so we do eat our own dog food, and we use this on a regular basis to source control, to actually do our releases every month. That's why we're able to do a release every month pretty smoothly. And so we actually use this internally as well. All right, so at this point, the pipelines aren't fast, unfortunately, but at this point, this should be completed. So our export did complete. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to deploy this. And let's just make sure, I'll go ahead and say this is ready. This is ready to deploy. All right. You can see I've got my source branch, which is my Johanna branch. That's my working branch. I've got my solution branch specified here. And I've got a toggle here to bypass approval. So this ultimately creates a pull request inside of Azure DevOps, and pull requests by default require somebody to go look at it and hit the approve button. We've added this recently to be able to bypass that, and this will automatically kind of go from the validation environment. If everything goes successful in validation, it will automatically deploy to the test environment. So we'll kick that off. And we've spent a whole bunch of time on the front end of this, and we haven't looked at anything in the back end yet. But you can see our pull request got created. There are some other there's some other functionality in here. You can kind of look at that in the documentation about what these things do. But this is the primary sort of loop that we're looking at today. All right, so I've got a pull request, and basically what I did there was just click on this link. I can click on this. I think I did it before. I can click on this one and actually see what's happening in Azure DevOps. I can also see the history of what's happened with my solution. So I've got a full history here of everything I've done. This is my development environment. So there's a lot of things that have failed because I'm doing development and then also using the ALM accelerator to do my source controlling. So yeah, let's click into this. All right, so this kicked off our build validation, and this is the first step. We're taking what we committed to source control, including all of those deployment settings, and we're going to push this out to an environment, and hopefully it's going to succeed. If it doesn't succeed, then it requires some manual intervention on somebody's part to say, you know what, go back and fix this issue, or you know what, I'm going to reject this pull request, go create a new pull request and fix the issues, whatever it may be. So if we drill down into this, you'll see we've got quite a few steps in here involved in our deployment. We've got, because this is our validation build, we're actually running Solution Checker right now. We've done some formatting of the source code that we pulled in from our branch. We actually have extensibility points within our pipelines, including this deployment pipeline, including the export pipeline that ran previously. There are extensions that you can add that we call hooks. So if you have something specific, for example, you want to run some static code analysis tool against your source code, you can absolutely do that as well as running Solution Checker. So any sort of validation that you want to do in this validation step, you can do using those hooks, which provide sort of, whatever. If you've got a Sonar Cube, you want to run Sonar Cube scans, you can use a hook to do that. We obviously won't include Sonar Cube scans in our out-of-the-box pipelines because that requires everybody to have a Sonar Cube license and et cetera. So those hooks kind of provide you with a lot of flexibility. A lot of what we've done in the September release is around flexibility. As I mentioned earlier, getting away from just having 3 environments to being able to have 5 or to have 1 environment in the downstream. All of that stuff, a lot of what we've built and what makes building something like this so difficult is that we have to cater to a whole bunch of organizations, and we have to cater to a whole bunch of personas and things like that. Generally, an organization will build out their pipeline specific to their organization, right? So we have built in a lot of flexibility into these pipelines to give people, that ability to customize things. So this is going to take a little while, and if we look back, let's go look back at our pull requests and see what that looked like as we wrap up here, because we are getting to the end of our time. So if I look at the files that have been updated, there are some files that have diffs, right? So this was my previous what's in my previous solution branch. This is what's in my new commit. And there are some of these files, and what you'll find is that the platform doesn't do a great job right now of handling noisy diffs, what we call them, because there are some things like these checksums that are always going to update. There's, this entropy that has like when it was exported and things like that, or when it was last saved. And you're going to see more diffs than you probably are comfortable with, or not comfortable with, but you would see in a normal sort of pull request scenario, right? Like if you're just committing code. But if we look at what's in the source here, so this is our unpacked Canvas app. This is the Canvas app that we updated. And if we scroll down, this diff is actually pretty straightforward, right? I changed my tasks to cat tasks. That looks good. So the platform is getting better and better at these types of things. Canvas apps are really good at handling, or doing source control in a way that kind of takes the noisy stuff and puts it in, these files that we can just safely ignore. But the source code is what we really want to look at when we're reviewing a pull request, and we can see exactly what has changed in here. So again, we've got some dates in here and things like that have changed, but we can safely ignore those, and we can approve this if we wanted to manually approve. But in our case, we decided to not manually approve, but automatically approve. All right, so that's still importing. I will stop here and we will take questions since we've got 5 minutes left. That was a lot, so feel free to ask questions.
Thanks, Mike. That was awesome. I think there's so much to kind of wrap our heads around too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know one thing that I had, question on is that, like when I'm setting up projects, and I just saw that Jens mentioned about what's coming up next month in terms of setting up those projects is awesome. And so I know, like for me, like it's setting up those users and getting them, currently when I'm setting up, they're not getting those deployment environments if they create a profile. So I'm creating them as an admin. It's like those troubleshooting things. But I do see Christian is from Argentina. Says, hello from Argentina for the COE team, professional developers. You recommend using this solution or directly using Azure DevOps with the Power Platform build tool tasks? In this solutions, we have some issues with impersonation.
Yep. So, sorry. Go ahead, Jens.
Sorry, I know maybe we're super short on time and it's quite late for me also, but you're welcome, of course, to continue. But I just want to say, from experience working with customers using the ALM Accelerator, I would absolutely say that the ALM Accelerator can put you in a position to have fully automated ALM quite fast compared to if you were to build the functionality yourself. And so I work with a number of customers in relation to ALM Accelerator, and the most sort of mature customer of them, I think they currently have like 60 different Power Platform projects onboarded, and 3 of the internal maker teams. So they have these maker teams that support different business units, each of them. So they are all using the ALM Accelerator for their deployment, and they've actually, I can also share that they would never have been able to set that up because they just don't have the internal skills or knowledge on Azure DevOps, all the PowerShell requirements, all the different, the depth of knowledge on all the different components of that can be in a solution. So Christian from Argentina, I would absolutely suggest you look into using ALM Accelerator. I think that would be, don't start building your own until you've seen what is in there. And as Mike said earlier, even just the pipelines, which is really, the magic of what we do, the pipelines you can use without our Canvas app. So, and you could also just, if you want to build your own, absolutely, you could. Please look at our pipelines to see how we've done things, just to at least, speed up your implementation process.
Yeah,
and just
as I mentioned previously, we release on a monthly basis, which means that we also are keeping up with the latest, in the platform. So we're, striving to move away from workarounds and things like that. And if you're kind of using our pipelines, then you're getting the latest and greatest, which is good. So go ahead.
I just want to share this thing, screenshots, just also in case you want to know more or follow along on our journey of building this tool and what other customers think. We do have office hours that are starting with the inaugural session on September 15. Here are the different times. European time zone, it's 16 in the afternoon, 9 a.m. Eastern, and 7 Pacific. You're welcome to screenshot this. This is the link for the office hours. This is the link to join in on the conversation, ask questions, participate in polls, and help us on how to prioritize our investments into this tool. So I think just that was an important message for me to give, so that you could, I think it would be valuable if you're interested in this type of solution or process automation or whatever we want to call it.
And Jens, I noticed that also on the announcement for that you also still would like people to make sure that they're using the issues list to get things figured out.
Yeah. So the office hours is not a support call. It is a call for us to share what's new and how we are planning to invest in ALM Accelerator. Also, if there is, share some news on what is going on in the product in terms of ALM. It's also an opportunity to ask questions to us, not how, I have a bug, I have found an error that says this. It's more, how would I best support my makers, or how can I make it simple for someone to do? It's to help us really understand what you need so we can prioritize our investment, right? But from if you ever been in the COE office hours, we are trying to replicate. We take a lot of learning from Manuela and the COE team. So if you've been in those, they are usually quite good. We hope ours will be the same.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry, Mike, you're muted there.
Sorry, I was just gonna say they're valuable for us and they're valuable for everybody, the users as well. So it's a good time.
This has been really great. Really appreciate it. And for the community, we have set up in the teams. We did set up a channel for ALM. So if people want to start having a discussion in there and kind of keep that going, off of the office hours or anything like that, feel free to use that. If you're not part of Teams, let me know. Make sure that you're added so that you have access to that. So. Guys, thank you so much again. Really appreciate it. And we maybe next year we can kind of come back to you with as we kind of get further into this journey and maybe talk about some more of like the back end and how it's changing for you with the upcoming releases.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, things are moving super fast. So who knows where we'll be in a year? I mean, let's reconvene. That'll be interesting.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. And for everybody who's going to be around, if you're going to be next week in Orlando, feel free to just shoot me a note. Would love to meet you. And again, if you want to get involved with the user group, again, please reach out. Looking for anybody who's interested in being part of it and suggesting any upcoming sessions. And we may take October off with it falling right at the beginning of Ignite. So we might just come back after and really talk about everything that happened at Ignite and how it's going to impact us as admins. So with that, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much.